Welcome to the Elaborate Topics podcast, where we focus on lab-specific strategies for medical laboratory professionals. We're proud to be the healthcare detectives that work behind the scenes to get the results needed to influence medical decisions. Let's grow together and jump right into the lab.
Welcome back to another episode of the Elaborate Topics podcast. I am your co-host, Stephanie Whitehead. I'm a laboratory leader and co-host for this show. If you're listening right now, please do me a favor and like this episode, share it with a fellow laboratory technologist or technician. Make sure you have a pen to take some notes because we're going to be offering a lot of great information today about how to engage and motivate your staff. So today, like I said, this episode will really be all about how to properly engage and motivate our staff. We've done so many podcasts in the past about how to retain our staff, how to orient our staff, the importance of retaining a great workforce in the laboratory profession. And today, once you have that staff on board, once you have them trained, once they're a part of the team, if you're in lab management, if you're thinking about being in lab management, I want to talk to you and give you some tips about how to properly engage and motivate your team. So employee engagement is not exactly employee satisfaction, and that's important for us as we move through the rest of this podcast and the rest of this episode for our listeners to really understand that when we're talking about employee engagement, I am not in any way talking about employee satisfaction. So you may be asking, so what's the difference? What is the difference between employee satisfaction and employee engagement? Well, employee satisfaction, by definition, is the measurement of an employee's happiness with their current job, processes, or conditions. So as a manager, as a lab supervisor, as a leader in your laboratory, there is in no way any possibility that you can be held to a standard of making sure another person is happy. Another person's happiness is completely outside of your control. There are so many things that happen in the course of a person's day that you have no bearing on. Their car could break down. They can get in a fight with their loved one. Something could happen in their personal finances that you have no control over. And so as a lab professional, if you're in management, I want you to really get away from making sure that I have to keep my staff happy. Your focus then should be to keep your staff engaged. Employee engagement is a measurement of the employee's commitment to the mission, vision, and goals of the organization. Now, why is that important? Because we want to be able to have employees that feel bought in, that feel that they are a part of the larger picture of the mission and the vision of the organization where they work. We want employees to know that when their turnaround times are great, how does that fit into the overall goal for our healthcare organization? When a phlebotomist does a great job with the patient, how does that fit into the overall goal for the organization's patient satisfaction score? And so there's a story I wanted to tell you guys to try to drive this home of a family who had gone on a vacation to a resort, and they had two small children, and one of the small children had a toy giraffe that he loved to carry everywhere that he went. Unfortunately, as they were leaving the resort, the little boy forgot his toy giraffe in the hotel room. He didn't realize it until they were already halfway home. So the father called the resort to see if there was any way that they would be able to ship him his toy giraffe. It was his favorite stuffed animal. He slept with it every night. This toy giraffe was really this little boy's best friend. The parents are frantic. They're thinking, what are we going to do? How can we get another stuffed animal? There were so many memories. This little boy was so tied to his toy giraffe. Well, lo and behold, the hotel was able to ship the toy giraffe to the parents' home, and it was waiting for them whenever they arrived back from the trip. However, something else really special happened. When they opened the box, there was a series of photos of the toy giraffe. He was sitting beside the pool in one photo. In one photo, the toy giraffe was sitting at the counter helping to check in the guests in the hotel as they arrived. And another photo, the toy giraffe was sitting beside the resort lake with a coconut drink in his hand. So someone had taken the initiative, someone had taken the time to go the extra mile and stage this toy giraffe at different places throughout the hotel to make it seem to the little boy that he had been having a great time while he was away from his friend. That is employee engagement. How willing are employees to go the extra mile, to do the extra thing? There's also a saying that says there's no traffic jams in the extra mile. Are our employees being motivated to do more than what's on their job description? Again, it's important because employee engagement, there are 5 factors that really target employee engagement, that really drive home who and what is influencing employees to be engaged in the areas of work. There's the organization they work for and the support for their leadership. That's one. It's their team and the trust they have in their coworkers and the effectiveness of working on a team. Do I feel like I'm working on a team? That's number 2. It's their supervisor. The person they directly report to has a large influence on if they're engaged. That's number 3. Their role, their individual role in your laboratory section, in your organization. And then 5 is their pay and their benefits. Do they feel like they are being fairly compensated, and do they feel like their benefits are competitive? When you look at those 5 points, organization, team, their supervisor, their role, their pay, the 2 biggest contributors to if your employees are engaged and if they feel like they are making a difference in your organization is their team and their supervisor. And those are the 2 things that as lab management we have the most influence over. Your team and your supervisor help to inspire employee engagement. So if your turnover is high in your departments, you may want to also look at this. Also, if your turnover is low, if people are staying and they seem happy, should you still be worried about employee engagement? Absolutely, because there are studies that show that 50% of the workforce quit every single day. But guess what? They don't quit physically. They just disengage. And what does that look like? When an employee disengages, that looks like mismanaged time, so loss of productivity. Lost productivity of actively disengaged employees can cost the U.S. economy $370 billion annually. $370 billion annually. That's a lot of money. And why do you say that? Because it looks like tardies, prolonged work breaks, delays, follow-up meetings or additional meetings because people weren't prepared for the first meeting or the follow-up meeting. People didn't have their action items ready, so we have to have another meeting. Overtime due to short staffing or re-recruiting or continuously training. So when people quit on the job and they're not engaged, what we see is a tremendous amount of inefficiency in our organization and our team. So by focusing on employee engagement, organizations are more likely to maintain a strong workforce that is willing to extend extra effort, drive business results home, and deliver a great return on investment. When we have great employee engagement, what that looks like is increased retention. We're keeping the people that we hire, which we know in the laboratory field today that's highly important. The people that we bring on are more productive, there's better communication, and there's more collaboration. So if you've got employee surveys that your organization does annually, pay attention to those. You have to have a thick skin to read the comments, and sometimes it can feel like a personal attack. But pay attention to what people are saying on those employee surveys the areas where your team feels like you guys should improve. Understand that it won't happen overnight, but do understand that it's important for me to move forward to a place where we can become more cohesive and a better team. Are you having meetings with your team about what's going on great and how they're connected to the bigger purpose in your organization? Are you promoting? Is there a clinical ladder? Are you offering continuing education and training opportunities? Are you doing team building and frequent reviews of the market analysis? And if you're doing these things, are you sharing those things with your team? These are all things that are vitally important as we start looking at employee engagement. As managers and supervisors, one of the most important things that we can do to engage our staff is build a relationship with them. When we build a relationship with our team one-on-one, we generate a sense of loyalty with our employees. We help focus on capturing the wins, and they are able to communicate issues and concerns directly to us. Think about a place where you worked, where you felt really connected to your boss. You felt like they were really invested in you, and they really had invested time and energy into making sure that you won as a laboratory professional and that you were important into the laboratory and the organization. So when we talk about connecting with our employees, the one technique that I love to coach about is employee rounding. Now, employee rounding, if you haven't heard of this before, it's a way to proactively, so you are seeking out these engagements, you are seeking out these conversations. You as the lab management are being proactive in engaging, listening to, communicating with, and building relationships that support your team. During these rounding sessions, you're setting clear expectations, you're focusing on key questions, and you're recognizing your staff. Now, rounding isn't walking through your laboratory and say, hey, how's it going? Hey, good morning. Hey, are the machines working? No. Rounding is intentional. As I mentioned before, it is proactive, and the focus is on building trustworthy relationships. Like I said, you want your employees to choose loyalty when it comes to retaining your staff. When another organization tries to lure your staff to come to their laboratory for more money, you want them to turn down those offers because they don't want to leave the culture in your department or in your laboratory because they've built a connection with you as a supervisor. There's a handout that I'll link in the show notes of my favorite tool to use when I do these rounding sessions. Like I said, it's intentional. So you want to make sure that you are documenting these rounding sessions. That way you can follow up on some of the conversations that you have. On a specific date, you want to pick a staff member, and I suggest rounding on, depending on the size of your staff, at least once or twice a month you hit your staff. So you're going to start with those relationship building questions. What's working well? Now, that may seem odd, but I like starting my rounding with the question of what's working well, because when your mind thinks about what's working well, it forces your mind to not think about what's not working well. Sometimes when you ask that question, just try it. Ask it to a friend at work. Hey, what's working well? What's going great today? What are we doing well today that we didn't do yesterday? You may see them, have to really struggle to find something. Because what's easy for anybody is to think about what's not working well. When I start my conversations with what is working well, it helps change the tone and the vibe and the mood of the entire rest conversation. So like I said, I like to start out my roundings with what's working well in the laboratory today. Do you know of anything that we can do better? This is also an opportunity for you to understand what is the reality of the laboratory versus a story that they may be telling themselves, and correct that. Then, as we move through our rounding session, I like to ask them, can you identify any process areas that we can do better? Can we move things around? Would it behoove us to have another workstation in an area? We like to ask about, how long did it take for a certain process to happen, or is there a way that we think that this could work better? Another important question to ask is, do you have all the tools and equipment you need to do your job? These are questions that many employees aren't asked frequently. Do you have all the tools and equipment that you need to do your job? Another question is, do you have any staff that you want to recognize today? These could be physicians. These could be people outside of our department or anybody inside of our department. And finally, any other help that you need from me right now? Is there anything that I can do to make your job easier? Like I said, during these conversations, we want to make sure that we're continuously steering people to understand what is the reality of the laboratory situation besides otherwise than what they're telling themselves. Maybe sometimes employees like to tell themselves stories. Also, this is also an opportunity to talk people off of whatever cliff they might be on. Sometimes we have employees that I like to say pre-suffer, so we can stop the pre-suffering. An example of pre-suffering is what happens when that batch will come at noon. The noon batch comes. Okay, well, it's not noon yet. Let's not pre-suffer. Maybe the noon batch won't even be that heavy today. Let's worry about those things as they come. Another thing that I get a lot is group suffering. So we like to stop that. Look at this crazy request that such and such physician gave to the phlebotomist. Well, it wasn't given to you. So, we will handle that, but let's not all suffer together as a group. Move people away from the thinking and negative, repetitive energy and thought and move them towards how can we take an actionable mode or an actionable approach to these requests. Let's close in on what we need to get done today. I'm sure many of you know this, but as lab management, as lab supervisors, as people in leadership roles, the majority of what we do every single day is just manage energy. Just managing the energy in the laboratory, focusing people back to the main goal of what we're doing and helping them really hone in on how to get things done that they need to get done that day. The second way that I like to really hone in on employee engagement is engaging my employees through consistent feedback. There are many studies that show that when laboratory management or any management don't focus in on feedback and accountability for employees, that is the number one thing that breaks down a team. That when we're not holding accountable our low performers or addressing subpar performance, that our high performers move away. So what we've learned, like I said, is the reluctance to address performance issues keeps you and your laboratory from doing your best. Now, I will say that dealing with performance issues is a process. If you don't have a great relationship with your human resources department, you may want to start engaging them and say, I've got a performance issue in my department, and I want to make sure that, I get your help on how to address those things. As laboratory managers, a lot of times what we do is we spend 80% of our time on people who perform low and 20% of our time in a day on people who have great performance, are high performers. So think about that. The people in your department who are not great performers tend to suck up all of your time. If you think about your day, 8-hour day for a lab supervisor, sometimes 12, 10-hour day. The majority of your day oftentimes is spent on dealing with, having conversations, documenting issues, correcting issues that have come from people who are low performers in our department. Oftentimes we don't have the time we need to focus on our high performers, and they suffer, and then our entire team suffers. Like I said, most managers focus all their times on employees with the most minimal payoff. Usually 1 to 3% of them are low performers, and that's where we're spending all of our time. And so it's time to change that. It's time to rework, like I said, where we're spending our time and rework our focus. We want to reverse that 80-20 rule and focusing on consistent feedback through a behavior model developed by Quint Studer, which is called the high, middle, low performance model, is my favorite model to use. The high, middle, low performance model is a systematic approach, like I said, developed by Quint Studer that creates a consistent method for providing meaningful feedback, setting appropriate standards for performance, and managing staff expectations. The model also supports the leader in spending energy on the majority of their more engaged staff. Like I said, we want to reverse that 80-20 rule. We want to invest our time on the employees that generate the greatest return on our investment. Now, none of this is a magic wand, right? You still have to have your rounding and your energy management tools. We still have to have our relationship building. We still have to mentor and coach our employees. But we also want to make sure it's our job as managers to make sure that we are setting appropriate standards for performance, managing those expectations, and providing feedback. Now, when you look at a normal distribution graph, the majority of your employees in your department will be middle performers. About 50 to 60% of your staff are middle performers. We'll go into great detail in just a moment about high, middle, and low performers. But like I said, a normal distribution, a bell curve, about 50% of your staff are middle performers. These are the people who have good attendance and great attitudes. About 30% will be high performers. These are your informal leaders. These are the people that if they quit, they would make a huge impact on you. And about 8 to 10% are low performers. Like I said, those are the ones that suck the life out of you. So if you look at this example, like 10 people rowing on a boat, in your department, you have 2 to 4 people who are rowing forward, about 1 to 2 people who are rowing backwards, and the rest are sitting in the middle. What we want to do is get those folks sitting in the middle to start rowing forward or to get off the boat. And I'm going to tell you how as we proceed through this discussion. So let's talk about our high performers. Well, the title high performer is pretty much innate and gives you a great idea as to who these people are in your department. In our department, like I said, 30 to 40% high performers. These are the people who, like I said before, if they quit, you'd be really hurt. These are our problem solvers. They could run the place in a heartbeat if you were absent. And as I'm talking, I'm sure these people are popping into your head. They come to work on time. They have great attitudes. They're problem solvers. Not only are they problem solvers, but they bring you solutions. You can relax when you look at the schedule and see that they are scheduled. A lot of times you'll put your new employees with them because you know they're a great influence, because they adhere to the policies. They demonstrate a high commitment to what they're doing. And just personally, they strive for excellence and have a high degree of professionalism and consistency in what they do. If you had an entire department full of these high performers, I mean, you could probably take several months off, because these high performers are, really self-sufficient. However, the sad truth is that people who are high performers generally feel or perceive that they are overlooked or ignored. High performers are generally self-sufficient employees, so we don't usually spend a lot of time on them. We usually, if you think about it, give them projects. They go away. They complete the project on their own. They ask for more work. So our high performers usually perceive that the low performers are our favorites because we spend most of our time with our low performers. Think about it. The high performer that you're envisioning in your head, when was the last time that you actually told them thank you? Usually how we thank high performers is giving them more work because we know that they can pretty much get it done. 55% of high performers said they are never or rarely thanked by their boss. Isn't that sad? We just said that these are the individuals that we don't want to leave our department. We don't want them to quit. But 55% of them said they are rarely thanked. Another very sad statistic is 47% of these high performers are actively looking for another job, updating their resume, or conducting internet searches or fielding interviews. And this is largely due to the lack of recognition, the lack of feeling rewarded, or just because they understand their value and they understand that they can take that value anywhere into another laboratory if they can. Keep that in mind as we move forward to our middle performers. Like I said, on the bell curve, the middle performers are the majority of your staff. These are the people who have great attendance. They're late. They may call in sometimes, but overall, they do a good job. They could do more with some more motivation or more experience or some more training, but you've pretty much got to nudge them and coach them into that. They help their managers become aware of problems, but only usually when prompted, and sometimes they give solutions, but also only when prompted. Typically, they adhere to policies. Sometimes you may have to write them up for a discrepancy here or there, but overall they're pretty good. Like I said, they usually have a good attitude, but occasionally they can be caught being negative with others. They're invested in personal growth, but may require some coaching. And so if you think about this is the majority of your staff. They're the solid groundwork to your department. And we need, middle performers, people who will come in, clock out, work the bench, do their job. And, with a little coaching could do a little bit more, but they pretty much hold down that shift. Finally, we've got our low performers. So these are the people on your department that suck the life out of you. As a matter of fact, if they were to quit today, you would actually be happy. They thrive on we, they. They're usually the spokesperson for all the problems in your department and complain rather than bringing forward problems. Your staff, I will assure you, would rather work harder than to work in a department with a low performer. The low performer takes breaks longer than they're allowed. They do not communicate effectively through any mode of communication, verbally, not verbally, through email. They view all leadership negatively. They are generally passive-aggressive, and they think they will outlast their leader, and that's really why they behave so poorly in your department. Now that I've given you all of these descriptions of your high performers, your middle performers, and your low performers, like we said in the beginning of every podcast, the Elaborate Topics podcast is a podcast that helps laboratory professionals excel inside and outside of the laboratory. So it's at this point of our talk that I want to give you an action plan, some actionable items that you can use to effectively deal with your high performers, your middle performers, and your low performers. And each action will be different, but they will all be effective in helping you engage each level of employee in your staff. So step one, and I hope you have your pens out, step one is to complete an assessment of your employees, differentiating them into these categories. Now, a rule of thumb is if you're wondering if somebody is a high performer, they're probably not. So a high performer usually doesn't have any howevers, buts, ifs, and so's behind their performance. So they're a great tech, but they're always late. She's an awesome cytologist, but she has a bad attitude. Hey, he's a great phlebotomist, but he calls in all the time. Well, if you're wondering if that's a high performer, it's not. So you want to take out a chart. You want to put your employee's name, all your employees' name, and then in your mind you want to do an initial ranking of each employee on your team. Do you think they're a high performer, a middle performer, or a low performer? And then you want to group your employees by their performance level. So I'm going to put all the high performers in one group, all the middle performers in one group, and finally all the low performers. There should only be a couple in my last group. Once I've done that, I want to determine a general schedule to have conversations with each employee on my team. And I'm going to prepare some notes, and I'm going to coach you through what we're going to say in each meeting. Now, it's very, very, very important that we have our high performer conversations first. So everybody in the group of high performers, we want to have their conversations first. About 30 minutes, like I said in the beginning of this episode, we want to schedule those rounding meetings and have their conversations first. Then we're going to schedule meetings with all of our middle performers. And finally, we're going to schedule meetings with all of our low performers. The goal is to create a gap between our high and middle performer conversations and our low performer conversations. So once we get into these meetings, we've got our high performers first. And this conversation is very positive. You know, we want to set the tone right up front that this is a very positive meeting. You know, really the purpose of the meeting is to re-recruit our high performers. We know, like I said before, that 55% of our high performers don't feel valued, don't feel like they're thanked for the work that they do. 47% of high performers are updating their resume or are looking for another job. So we want to make sure we use this opportunity, this block time, to re-recruit our high performers. So, you know, start out with a statement like, if you didn't work here, I would consider you a friend. You know, you want them to feel good about the conversation. Tell them a little bit about where the department is going and your vision for them in that overall plan. You know, high performers want to feel like they are moving forward, they are excelling, and they are a part of your larger vision. Thank them for all of their work. Tell them specifically why they are valued. You know, a lot of times, and if you consider yourself a high performer, you understand this, but high performers aren't generally impressed by superficial compliments like, oh, we all did a great job, or, you know, great teamwork, or you're so wonderful, you're an awesome employee. Outline specifically and exactly to you what they have done. That is so important. Were they vital on a recent validation of a new instrument? Were they instrumental on the go live of your new LIS? Has them stepping up and helping train the new employees help move forward the training roster? You know, tell them specifically what they have done and what they have contributed to your laboratory section or department. You want to ask them, what can you, as their lab manager, supervisor, leader, do for them? Most high performers will also ask you for more responsibility, more training, or personal development, so be ready for that. But be very clear that this is not a coaching session. Again, we are here to re-recruit you, thank you, and to show you positivity for being such a great employee. Now, you're going to have all of those conversations up front. Again, if you've got a team of 10 people, there should be 2 to 4 people that you're having conversations with. All of these people will walk out of your department saying, gosh, what a great productive meeting. You know, that was really informative. Next, we're going to pull in our group of middle performers. We're having these conversations one-on-one and singularly through each employee. We're moving through these different steps of feedback and expectation setting. So you've met individually with all your high performers. Now you will meet individually with all your middle performers after all the high performer conversations. Remember, this is the majority of your staff. You've already met with 30% of your staff and created a positive environment for these meetings. So as your staff talks, why is Stephanie pulling everybody into her office? Your high performers can set a positive tone for these meetings because their meetings as high performers were positive. So your middle performers will come in. Their goal is a little bit different in these meetings. We're going to reassure them that they're not in trouble. We're going to re-recruit them, retain them, but we also want to support, coach, and reaffirm. So again, we want to make them feel good, but we do need to develop them a little bit more. When I say support, I want you to describe some good qualities that they have. Calm down any anxiety they may have by assuring them that they are valued to the team and exactly why you value them. But we also want to cover 1 to 2 max opportunities for professional development that they have. Now, we don't want to overload the employee. So I would say pick 1 to 2 things that they can improve on and focus on those. And then again, we want to reinforce the good qualities that they have. Now that you've met with all of your middle performers, all of your high performers, you've met with 90% of your staff. Now it's time to pull in those low performers and have those conversations. Again, if you need to engage your human resources department, this is where you want to pull them in, because this conversation will be the hardest, the most difficult, but it's the most effective. Like I said, your employees don't want to work with low performers. They would rather work smarter, not harder. So it's our commitment to these high and middle performers to hold the low performers accountable. Before you deal with these performers, you want to pull in your boss or your HR because they are better at this conversation than you are. They've been having these conversations their whole life, in high school, with their coaches, with their family members. You want to make sure you have a witness in the room to help you with the conversation, and you want to make sure that you are taking notes. Now, as you pull in your low performers individually, this conversation is not starting out on a positive note. You want to start by saying, this is a very serious meeting that we should have had earlier. Set the expectation up front so you do not send any mixed messages. Studies show that typically low performers will interrupt you within 20 seconds of a conversation. So you want to make sure you state up front, please don't interrupt me. I will give you an opportunity to speak after I'm done having my entire conversation. Typically, like I said, low performers are comfortable with these conversations. The conversation may not be as easy for you. You may be nervous, especially if you haven't had very many difficult conversations. But it's essential that we start holding these low performers accountable to their performance. We want to do a couple of things in these conversations. We want to make sure that we describe the behavior that we are observing that is unacceptable and be very specific. If you can, notate times and dates. Maybe even bring out your employee handbook if you need to. You need to evaluate or describe how that negative behavior impacts your department, your patients, or your staff, or your overall health system. You want to detail for the employee exactly what they need to do moving forward with effective dates. You need to let them know the consequences of not changing this behavior, and most important is you need to follow up. The most important part of the conversation with the low performer is to follow up. It means nothing if we don't continue to hold them accountable and we just have, one conversation with them. After we've had this conversation, like I said, the ultimate goal is to re-recruit and praise our high performers, to give our middle performers 1 to 2 things that we want to coach them on and help them focus and get motivated on moving from high performers to low performers, and to set the expectation for our low performers that they either need to move to middle performers or move out of the organization. You can't please everybody in your department at the same time. So as a manager or as a supervisor, we want to focus on at least pleasing the people who will have the highest return on investment, and those are our high and our middle performers. So once you've had this conversation, what have you accomplished? What have you done? Well, you've demonstrated, one, the care and the concern for the strongest members of your team. We've demonstrated that we are willing to support our high and our middle performers. We've demonstrated a commitment to their growth and their development and an appreciation for them, and we've reaffirmed that with these conversations. You've also let those with subpar performance know exactly where they stand in your department and what they need to do to improve that stance as a low performer. Now, I would like to suggest a book, and it's called Crucial Conversations, a tool for talking when stakes are high. And the Crucial Conversations book, to me, like I've said before in other episodes, is a great book to help really drive home some fundamentals of having a difficult conversation. Ironically, you can only get better at having difficult conversations when you have a lot of difficult conversations. And so if this for you is a difficult thing, something you haven't really practiced, or something you don't feel like you're that good at, it's great to, one, get mentoring, so talk to somebody who has had a couple of different conversations to coach you through how to face them and how to handle them well, and then read as many resources as you can. I hope that you found this talk informative and helpful in helping you empower, engage, and motivate your staff, helping you to identify your high, middle, and low performers and how to action each level of performance in your department and how to move them to excellence at any level that they can. As a lab leader in our department, it's our duty to make sure that we're continuously cultivating, coaching, mentoring our laboratory leaders and our laboratory professionals that are in our departments. If you like this podcast and you want more information, feel free to reach out to me at Stephanie Y. Whitehead on any of my social medias, LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter. If you like this podcast, like I said, make sure you share it, like it, leave a comment, leave a question. We're happy to help answer any questions that you need. We know it's a difficult topic, and sometimes as a new laboratory leader, it can be difficult to navigate some of these situations. Feel free to subscribe to our podcast on directimpactbroadcasting.com or send us an email at elaboratetopics@directimpactbroadcasting.com for questions about the show or just to be a guest on the show. Look forward to hearing another awesome episode of the Elaborate Topics podcast next week, dropping on Tuesday. We look forward to hearing from you. We look forward to reading all of your comments. But until then, have a great day.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Elaborate Topics, where your hosts discussed relevant strategies for laboratory professionals. Please subscribe to this podcast on your favorite podcast platform and listen to us on directimpactbroadcasting.com. Stay tuned for another episode with information you can use to excel in your laboratory career.